Hello, everybody, and welcome to this presentation with the Further Education Support Service. My name is Michael Hallissy. I'm from H2 Learning, and I am delighted to be joined today by Finola Butler and Mary Sheehy. H2 has had the privilege of working very closely with FESS over the last 18 months on a number of activities in the area of emergency remote teaching. And today's session is all about hearing from Finola and Mary about the wonderful work they have been engaged in, and in particular, the impact that that work has had on the further education and training sector. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Finola and Mary to bring us through their journey over the last 15 months. I can tell you they've been very, very busy. So tighten your seatbelts, and it is only 15 months and they will tell you about what they've been engaged in. But before I do that, Finola, would you introduce yourself, and Mary, you might do the same then afterwards, and we'll get the show on the road.
Okay, Michael. Well, look, as you said, my name is Finola Butler and I am working with the Further Education Support Service, more commonly known, I think, out there as FESS. Everybody talks about FESS all the time. I'm based in the Dublin office. My colleague Mary Sheehy is also here today, and she's based in the Wicklow office. We've both been working with FESS for a number of years, I suppose, and to tell you the truth, the last 15 months, we actually haven't seen anything like it before. There has been no time like it. So we've 3 other support officers also working with FESS, located in different regions around the country as well. We're funded by Solace, and each of the 5 offices then will be housed within a particular ETB around the country. All that information is available on our website if you want to find out more about us, www.fess.ie. So I suppose just to say then that the role of the support service, has always been to provide support to providers of further education and training in delivering quality assured programs and services to learners. And over the years, we've been doing that in a number of ways, I suppose. A lot of it has been developing and delivering professional development opportunities, through seminars and so on, and that would have been done locally, regionally, or nationally, all around the country in face-to-face environments. We had a calendar of events as well, twice a year, a lot of resource development and a lot of work, I suppose, and the outputs of that available on our website, as I mentioned. And we also would have been involved in the delivery of a kind of a consultancy service via meetings, email and telephone to the FET providers in our space. So I suppose, along with everybody else in the FET, sector, from last March, we've really had to reimagine how we carry out our role. We've all been on this journey together, I suppose, and we are looking forward to sharing some of our experiences with you today.
Very good. And I suppose we're going to get into this in a bit more detail. Mary, do you want to say a little quick word to everybody? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Mary Sheehy and I'm based in the Wicklow office. And as Finola said, it's been a bit of a whirlwind of 15 months adapting to the new ways of doing things. So yeah, we'll just fill you in through this presentation on different things we've done through the year or so.
Perfect, Mary. Thanks, Emil. And I suppose, Finola, you used that verb reimagine and how you reimagined the way you operate. So I know we're going to focus on this and we're going to get into the detail on this, but just even at high level, can you just talk briefly about what the reimagining consisted of for you at a macro level over the last 15 months?
Okay, look, I said previously the majority of our work, I suppose, was traditionally done in a face-to-face environment. We were lucky to have had a website always to accompany our work, and we would always have had, I suppose, a range of resources and materials available there. So we kind of were off to a good start in that sense. And we also were used to dealing with a lot of people with email and phone and kind of that advisory service, which we could continue to do. So I suppose, reimagining is exactly what we did do over the period of 15 months. But I think initially we kind of started slowly before we kind of went very quickly, if you know what I mean. So initially, I suppose we would have found in March and April, there was a high demand really for that ongoing email, phone, consultancy, advisory kind of services. That actually increased dramatically from mid-March. QQI would have published a lot of guidelines and so on regarding the emergency situation, the contingency planning, the QA requirement. And we had a lot of calls and a lot of people needing to bounce ideas off us to get advice to help them plan their own QA system. So just the very beginning time was really about that. I suppose then we also said, look, people are going to need things, they're going to need resources. So during March and April, we did a lot of searching to find resources that might help people quickly. So we gathered a range of useful information, some of which actually would have already been in our website. And we created a dedicated space on the FESS site to provide easy access to this a range of support materials. Now, we were also conscious as well in those early months that like we had to kind of keep our business going, which is the service we would have been providing anyway in terms of PD. You know, still people needed, I suppose, to avail of what we would have been providing around assessment or feedback or any of those things. So what we had to do at that point was kind of redesign some of our traditional professional development courses and convert them into a way that would be suited for online delivery. So people could still access that. And while doing that, we then also knew we had to start creating new resources to meet the new emerging needs of vet staff, specifically in the area of emergency remote teaching and then subsequently assessment. So I suppose, you know, it's fair to say we started small and then we moved from there. We were very conscious, I suppose, as well, that while we had some experience within the support service in this area, we had worked with different providers on quality assuring blended learning. We had immersed ourselves in the blended learning guidelines. We did know as well that in order to be able to provide more informed, meaningful support during the emergency period, we needed to upskill ourselves. So we would have undertaken, I suppose, a number of courses. And one of them that really stands out with me, and I know with Mary as well, because we only talked about this recently, was the Open Teach one that we had actually signed up for maybe the month before March, you know, or 2 months, where we had signed up to do this Open Teach, how to teach online. Dr. Orna Farrell in DCU was very involved in that. And it really gave us a good feel as to what online learning, I suppose, might look like. So I found that fantastic, and I know Mary would probably agree with me as well. So there were other courses we undertook as well, and lots of readings and lots of things to try and get ourselves up to speed. But by mid-May, I suppose, you know, what became obvious, Michael, was that we needed a more structured support on an ongoing basis for vet practitioners. So that's when we initiated, I suppose, the development of a suite of supports and resources to support vet staff throughout the period of the pandemic. And at this point, we knew it wasn't going to be over anytime soon. I think everybody was kind of, we hoped, but we kind of knew deep down we were going to be back to online in September. So I suppose just a whistle stop of those 4 key elements of that suite, and then we'll go through those in more detail with you then. So we designed, I suppose, a blended learning handbook that was that's available on our website. We then went on during June to work with yourself, Michael, and H2 Learning to develop a bespoke online professional development course to assist vet staff in moving their programs to a blended mode. And that then kicked off in September. Then from September, we also then ran with this idea of having weekly online clinics, and they have continued right through since then up until now. And then linked to those clinics, there would have been a supplementary range of resources to support the use of a number of digital tools. And then in December, what became apparent then from lots of queries and different providers talking to us, that we needed another online professional development course, another bespoke course, I suppose, to assist vet staff in moving to remote assessment, because that then came into, I suppose, everybody's eye line then. You know, again, we knew things weren't going to be back to normal after Christmas. So I suppose that gives you an idea of what we've been doing in the last number of months.
Yeah, no, thanks, Finola, and definitely, I know what's very clear from what you've just said is that it was a journey that was informed all the way along by the needs of the sector, and it was one that grew organically. And thank you for that helicopter tour of what you did. So I'm going to focus in now with Mary just on the blended learning handbook, a resource that I know that that you developed last May. And Mary, so how did that come about, and what's in that handbook, and how has it been used across the sector?
Okay, well, I suppose in May we decided to develop a handbook. We already had 2 handbooks available to the sector in academic writing and referencing. So we thought a handbook might be useful because it might bring people kind of step by step through the process of blending their course. And we figured, that would be a useful resource to develop. So we spent a few months developing that. We brought in Liz Hogan, who's a blended learning expert, to work with us on it. Because she had, prior to COVID, she had been involved in the blending of a course for online delivery, or partly online, partly face-to-face. So she had that practical experience, which was fantastic. And she will have said herself that when she blended the course, she had the luxury of doing it in, at her own leisure, if you like, as opposed to being forced online through the pandemic and the response to that. So it was fantastic to have Liz on board. And Michael, of course, yourself, you were also involved in an input, a very useful input into the handbook before its publication. So I suppose we had to get outside expertise to help us in that. The handbook is laid out in easy to follow, step-by-step process. It's based on the ADDIE model, so analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. So it guides people through the process of analysing everything to do with their course, to see where things are currently and which bits would fit best online or face-to-face or in the workplace or whatever. Then it brings them through the design stage, through designing the content, making sure that there's a logical flow and a balance to it. Then the development section brings you through creating engaging online environments, and the focus there is, on how to engage learners, and there are tips and tools there around doing that. Then the next step is the implementation, and it looks at, I suppose, rolling out the online delivery and issues relating to that, and even things like maintaining engagement with learners online, which can be quite challenging, and also maybe things like giving feedback to learners on their assessment tasks. And then the final bit is the evaluation, and I suppose in line with all initiatives, it's essential to evaluate how it went and see what worked well and what might be changed for the future. So like the FESS staff who have used it and have given us feedback said that they found it very useful, that it guided them through the process of moving either their entire course or parts of their course online. It gave them a structure that they could work within. And I suppose in a way, they weren't really developing blended courses. They were moving things online in an emergency situation. But I suppose the basis and the things they have to focus on are quite similar. So it was quite useful from that point of view. I suppose the focus on planning is really important. Planning what you're going to do, what should be done where, which is the best place to do certain things. So we've received a lot of positive feedback on the handbook, and in particular the focus on planning and design, learner engagement, and different tools that can be used for different activities, and especially for enhancing learner engagement.
Thanks, Mary, and I think it's very interesting that you worked with Liz. As it so happens, we worked with her initially on that project, Blend for Vet, can't get away from all these people. And I think your point is so well made that project took place a number of years ago, long before we ever heard of COVID, and the fact that Liz was able to work in a childcare setting at the time, if memory serves me right, in a non-emergency remote teaching context, was wonderful. And I think we should all keep that in mind, even as we're listening to this session today, that that during the emergency remote teaching, we didn't have control of all the cards, and we had to make do with the best of what we had available. And that brings me on, Finola, to the next big piece of work you undertook. So, listening to Mary there about the process and the planning and all, in the handbook, you then decided you needed to do something else, and that was a course. So do you want to tell us about that and what was entailed there?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this was a very exciting initiative. I mean, for a number of reasons. One of them is we were going to have the chance to work with you directly on it, Michael, because we would have known at this time, while we had learned a lot ourselves, we did need to bring in an expertise here in this area to help with the development of this course. So we were delighted to work with you on it. So I suppose we did know deep down that people returning for the academic year beginning September 2020, they were going to need some support on how to reimagine and convert their courses for online delivery. I think from March to May in the academic year of programs, there was a lot of focus on getting their assessments in, finishing off courses and that kind of stuff. But now we were in a different space. Now we were going to be helping people to plan starting delivering their courses right from the beginning for online, not knowing when they were going to be able to see their learners face to face again. So we knew that they needed support in this area. And I'm talking about the academic year because it just happened to be in timing with the academic year, but anybody in any kind of provision would have been able to avail of this course and did avail of this course. We were also very conscious in the design of this as well that, you know, FETS staff would need flexibility in how they were going to engage with some of the course materials. I mean, you know, they were coming back into a busy year. They were not knowing where things were. They needed to be able to access some of the materials in their own time. They then also needed to be able to revisit the material again and again if they needed to go back and look at it. So I suppose with this in mind, we were very anxious that there would be a pre-recorded or an asynchronous element to this course. So what came out in the end, I suppose, were that we had 3 pre-recorded or asynchronous sessions available to people, with a 4th session, which was going to be the live online session, because we still thought it was important for people having done work on the asynchronous material to come together and share and learn from others, I suppose, at a live session. So just briefly to say, I suppose, what the course actually covered. We did acknowledge that it was very important to reflect on what had been happening during the COVID crisis, I suppose, already. A lot of people had learned stuff since March. We thought it was important to explore that for people to own that, but also consider then where they might go from there. I suppose then a large part of it was introducing the ABC learning framework, and then getting them to think about what that might look like in their own context and really think about what blended learning is and isn't. And then it moved on to the foundations of learning design. So where they would be designing how their course would look using blended learning and online learning. I suppose what was really important, I think, is that a process and structure would be provided to FETS staff to help them in designing blended learning to meet their learner needs. So this would have included, obviously, a number of tools and resources that FETS staff found very useful, particularly, I think, the Teach Nimble Planner and the technology wheel, because a lot of people would have come back to us on that and said, oh my God, I can't believe that planner, it was so useful. Or they would have come back and talked about the technology wheel, just to give them ideas. They would have adapted them, obviously, for their own context later on. I would say, generally speaking, from this course, the participants really found the engagement with peers to be fantastic. And I mean, I'm going to say this again and again, I'm sure, in this interview, but the amount of buy-in, of peer sharing and peer learning and willingness to share anything they could with anybody. And Mary, you'll probably say the exact same this later when you're talking about clinics or whatever. I think that is what they found of most use. So the live sessions worked out very well from that point of view. And but also I think that message of focus first of all on what learning you're trying to, I suppose, do with your students. What are the types of learnings, rather than focusing firstly on the digital tools. I think that switch became really important for the sector as well, and anybody who did the course would have found that very useful. And just on that, I suppose, approximately, I think about 800 FETS staff booked in with FESS to undertake this course, and there wasn't one negative comment in relation to it from what we have heard anyway. And I think it's also important to say too that while the primary focus for this course was to support staff during the COVID emergency period, the material will also have use after COVID, because many of the key messages here, I think particularly about the importance of learning design or whatever, they will remain into the future for future properly planned blended learning programs into the future, do you know? So I don't know if I've actually addressed, Michael, all of the key.
No, you have, and I suppose, and thank you for the kind words. I mean, I think that model, as you said, worked well. That people could go and learn in their own time on the asynchronous, because I think we had all become nearly jaded with this, with the live event where we were sitting and listening to, trying to take in content alive. Whereas this model kind of, it I suppose replicated good practice, similar to what Orna had probably done with you on the other course, where you do the acquisition in your own time, and that piece there about the peer engagement and the sharing. But I just finally, was there any other learnings? Because I think, oftentimes you touched on it there, and I hear this a lot, people are overly focused on the technology and they think actually it's all about the tech, and rather than thinking about what they want to do and maybe thinking about the tools they have at their hands, and those things about the learning outcomes, and like that first and foremost they're involved in learning. So is there anything extra you just want to say there before we move on?
Yeah, I would say another point that I suppose another key piece of learning that would have emerged was the importance of planning your blend for your course. I think Mary would have mentioned that in the handbook as well. It's so important to plan it, and it's so important, and everybody likes being reminded of this. We need to always go back and remember the learning outcomes. We need to start with the learning outcomes, what needs to be taught, what you need the learner to learn, and consider how to plan the learning experience from there. And then you think about the tools you might use to do that, I suppose. And then to limit the number of tools. I think everybody would have said that, they were looking at the wheel and the technology wheel, but actually it was to pick the right ones for the right purpose, I suppose, ultimately. So I think a lot of people, and I've even heard somebody recently saying something about, I remember something I learned on that course and it has never left me. And it is, start with what the learning experience is you're trying to create. And this was only about a week ago, and I think they did the course last September. So it's good that that has stayed in the minds of people, that it's not, the tools are fantastic, but it's not all about get as many tools as you can. You need to think about the experience you're trying to create first of all. Yeah.
No, I think that's a key piece. And I actually had a chat with a secondary school teacher in an ETB last Friday, and he was actually making that same point. I mean, this particular teacher is using a range of tools, but often, he finds teachers are confused almost, that they're using tools and they're not really sure why they're using it. But I think that's if people can take that from the course, it's wonderful. But Mary, you didn't stop there. I mean, again, to me, and I use this term quite a lot in relation to professional development or professional learning, that you have a patchwork quilt almost of different options. And one of those options are these clinics. Pray tell, Mary, what are these clinics about and how do they differ from the courses that you were running?
Okay, well, I suppose to support people using the Blended Learning Handbook and to support them as a follow-up to the Reimagining course, we figured people would have questions and queries. So we decided to put on these blended learning clinics. There's something we never did before. So we were excited about it, but we were also a bit nervous, because normally when we're presenting at a PD session, we have our slides and we've our activities and we've everything worked out to a T. And here we were going into a clinic which was on for a 1 hour duration, and it was basically participant led. So people were expected to come in with their queries and then we would respond to them. So, that can be a kind of a scary place when you don't know what to expect in there. So we ran them weekly for 1 hour, as I said, and the focus was around supporting people. But it was a drop-in facility. People would arrive with their cup of tea or cup of coffee, and they'd have queries. And sometimes if there was a lull, we might, draw them out or whatever. But people also brought a huge range of their own experiences and expertise that they were very willing to share. As Finola said already, there was a huge willingness to share all sorts of information and ideas in those clinics. Like, for example, one day somebody had a query about, like, if you're teaching maths or something like that, how do you do that on the whiteboard? And we were having a discussion about maybe using your phone, holding your phone up over where you were writing the maths. And somebody else said, well, what about a visualizer? So they actually had a visualizer. They demonstrated it at the clinic, which was fantastic. So then we bought visualizers and we were able to demonstrate them from then on. So it was a kind of I suppose we were learning as we were going along, and people were finding that it was a supportive environment to be in. We ran the clinics from about either 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 in the afternoon. So we felt that that would accommodate people who were teaching online all day, that they might have more availability in the afternoon. So they were a great opportunity for peer learning, so people could ask questions, but they could also share suggestions and ideas and information. At the start of each clinic, we ran a poll just to get a sense of who was there and what were the kind of the hot topics that might come up. And at every clinic, I think, we did just impromptu demonstrations of different digital tools, depending on what the issues that were raised by the participants, and we would respond to that by demonstrating digital tools or whatever. So as a result of those demonstrations, people wanted to know, can we record these so that we can have access to those? So that kind of led on to the development of some short videos on digital tools that I suppose the participants could look back on again, and maybe they might use them with their own learners. So they're all available on a web page on our website, www.fess.ie.
Yeah, Mary. No, I think there's an awful lot there. I think the model again and again, I think that again, this patchwork, that this was another way of providing access to FESS staff who had particular queries that may not have got covered necessarily in the formal course. As we know, sometimes courses can be very time bound and there's a bit of a rush on. And if you were probably meeting these people in a workshop in Tralee or in Wicklow or wherever, they'd probably come up and ask you the question afterwards. Whereas in the online world, that kind of impromptu questioning was done away with. And I really love the way that you designed these, that people learned from each other. And also, I know from other chats we've had, that sometimes there was a bit of silence, and you got used to that, and but you had you had other things ready. And I love the story of the visualizer, the teachable moment or the learnable moment. I don't know if that's good English or not, but I think that's a great story, and it just shows that this is a learning profession and that we're all involved in. And just another word, Mary, on because I've used your resources on your website. Your website has grown, I think it's fair to say, over the last 15 months in terms of those videos. You have videos on Padlet and Edpuzzle and Kahoot and Mentimeter. And do you want to say a little word about that? Did you recreate those yourselves, or did you, use examples from the field, or what can people expect if they go and check out those resources?
Yeah, we have a number of videos up there at the moment on how to use things like Padlet, Edpuzzle, Kahoot, Mentimeter, Nearpod, ThingLink. And also there's a request came through one of the clinics where how do you do voiceovers and animations on a PowerPoint. So we did a short video on that. So they were kind of in response to what came out of the clinic. So some of it was how to use them and how to use the tools, maybe how to set something up. And then others were about how to engage learners or maybe work collaboratively with learners. So our plan is to continue expanding that suite of resources as time goes on.
Fantastic. And Finola, you didn't stop there. I mean, again, we're talking about reimagining, and again, I'm always struck when I get a phone call from you. There's a new idea where we're going next. You had this idea from a long way out about assessment, and you touched on it there at the outset. So tell us about that and how that, I suppose, responding once again to the needs of the sector, um, what what was driving that and what you ended up creating in the end?
Yeah, I suppose it became obvious in autumn of 2020 that people weren't going to be back in the spring, maybe to be able to do a lot of the assessments that they thought they would be able to do face to face. You know, it became, everything was so uncertain all of the time. And I suppose some of us in the support service had been working with a couple of centres or ETBs around this, devising alternative assessments, do you know, the way for their, you know, for their modules or whatever, to allow them to be able to do it with remote learners. So ultimately it was really looking at things like, well, we can't do a face-to-face exam or a you know, practical theory or whatever, or skills demonstrations that we would have done in centre. What are we going to do with those? So I suppose the original kind of awareness that this was an issue came when, again, a couple of ETBs started saying, look, Finola, can you do a bit of work on this? And can you come in and work with us? We're trying to quality assure this. We're trying to help people. So then we talked about it as a team again, because I mean, everything we decide is very much a team approach and agreement or whatever. So we talked about it as a team. We said, yeah, actually, this is another area that actually the wider sector probably would need some support in. So that's when I suppose that phone call or email or, hi, Michael, are you there to help us out again? Because again, I suppose while we didn't know in this instance, we had a lot of experience to bring to the table around assessment, we still needed some support with the assessment in the online space, I suppose. And then ultimately creating the courses to make them look nice on that lovely platform you have there in Teach Nimble. So, and to make it easy to access. So again, as I say, we partnered with yourselves, and we really did want to focus beyond the summative. Like while a lot of the queries we were getting were around, how do I devise an alternative assessment? How do I, and it was summative. So we did think, and this was following discussions with yourself, Michael, I remember them, about like, it's really good to maybe begin to work on the use of some of the technologies or in the formative assessment space to build up people's confidence and everything. So what we did is we decided we were focusing on both formative and summative assessment and looking at how to, I suppose, engage learners in the online space when they're remote, really. What we did this time was quite different, is that we decided to, I suppose, capture the learning from a number of different case studies across the FESS sector. And I suppose we were lucky that we had seen some of these emerging, and we were very, very lucky that we got a lot of very obliging people. And as I say, you know, every time we asked, everybody said yes, and that continues to be the case. So we had a good number of case studies, both in the formative assessment and the summative assessment space, where people would have tried different things and they worked, there may be some challenges in them, but they were willing to share that with us. So what I suppose this course, there were, again, we stuck with the same model that worked the last time, where there would be pre-recorded sessions that people would be able to engage with the sessions in their own time and then dip back into them if they wanted to repeat them or whatever, followed in this case by an optional online live session. Because in many cases, we felt that some people may have gotten enough from the pre-recorded sessions, but that if they wish to come along, and we did run, I think, about 4 or 5 of the, I can't remember now, Mary, you'll probably remember it more than me, but I think there was 4 anyway of the live online sessions we run subsequently to the course we ran. So I think what came out of here is the participant loved the case studies. They love to see how others approach converting assessments to suit their learners that are remote. And a lot of those were around the theory and practical exams, you know, and converting them to more project-based, kind of scenario-based assessments, amongst other things. So there's a lot of really good examples there of practice that was working well, and people really enjoyed those. So that's kind of a snapshot of it, I suppose. There's a lot of learning from that as well, Michael, which I can go into as well if you wish.
Yeah, I think you've covered it really well. I mean, I think the capturing of practice is so important, and I think you've done that really well, because I think if I'm teaching in a PLC setting, I'm really only interested in examples from a PLC, whereas if I'm in an apprenticeship setting, I'm probably more interested in those. So I think that's great to hear, and I think you've really started something with connecting those examples of practice, and I know that those particular videos are really, really interesting. But you haven't stopped there. I know from recent work that you've gone a little deeper even on some of those case studies. You've taken them a step further. Do you want to say a word on that?
Yeah, before I just go ahead with that, I just wanted to just maybe mention a couple of the I suppose, the important key messages that we think would have come out of those case studies. And just then maybe go on to maybe the stuff that we're now working on, because I know there's more as well. So just firstly, I would say in terms of formative assessment during the pandemic, I mean, the key messages that would have emerged was, you know, again, it's back to selecting the right tool for the right purpose. I mean, that has come through in a number of the case studies. The importance of planning what you're doing for formative assessment, and that a centre-wide approach would be quite useful, not to cause confusion for learners in terms of the ways in which it might be done. And also the importance of following up with learners afterwards, that, okay, you can do a bit of formative assessment, but you've got to remember to go back and engage with them, I suppose. And then that unlocking the potential of ePortfolios, both for the formative and the summative space when it comes to assessment. And we'll talk about those again later. I think the key messages that came out though in the summative assessment case studies, they're not unlike the messages that are always there for assessment. So there weren't actually too many surprises here, but I think everybody really enjoyed the fact that they were being reminded of them in the case studies as well. So one of them, for example, is, you know, again, ensuring academic integrity, keeping assessment tasks current, authentic, and meaningful. You know, that's so important when you're actually, because one helps the other. If you keep things current and meaningful, it'll help with academic integrity. Also, I suppose the concept of constructive alignment came up quite a bit in the case studies. And again, people like to be reminded that we must make sure our assessment tasks are aligned with the learning outcomes. Using a learner-centered approach and being transparent with the learners about assessment information. And then I suppose, you know, unlocking that potential of integration. Integration can be really useful to maybe reduce assessment workload. And when you're trying to assess learners when they're remote, maybe that's useful. It doesn't mean that they won't be marked and graded for all their modules, but that potential of integration is there as well. And I suppose also what came through were the challenges that sometimes existed, particularly around workplace assessment. And they were highlighted through the case studies with some solutions provided. That was particularly challenging, I suppose, in the time of the pandemic. You know, do you know what I mean? So the learning that participants took from the course as well reflected those key messages. But the intent, I suppose, of the case studies worked out in the end, because the learning then that came through later was actually similar to that.
Yeah, and I think you haven't finished with the case studies.
No.
Is that true?
No, we're still
going further.
And I suppose, Michael, what actually arose, as I mentioned there, around the formative assessment was the potential of ePortfolios. And then this has been raised a couple of times with us in a number of different quarters. And I'm sure Mary's probably come up in the clinics as well. So I suppose following on from it being raised during this course and it being raised in a number of other areas, we said that we would start looking at bringing in some resources on the use of ePortfolios. So we're currently working with a number of ETBs, again, around sharing their practice. And because different ETBs, different centres, and even learners use ePortfolios for different purposes. So we're trying to capture a broad spread of the purposes, really, and showing then, using different types of platforms and tools, how ePortfolios can be prepared, I suppose, and worked on, both by the centre and the FET staff within the centres, and then by maybe learners. So, and again, I'm going to say it again, it's just amazing, because as soon as we put out the request for some help in this area, in terms of case studies, there was so much generosity out there in the sector. This has been apparent right throughout the emergency period. So many people have been willing to share their experience of what works well with others. And I think that's going to continue long after this pandemic is over. Okay, so keep an eye on the website for the next round of supports around ePortfolios. We were hoping the end of May. It may end up being early June by the time we get them all together, but we wanted them there for people that might be planning really for the next academic year. So they will be available on our website.
Yeah, no, and I think it's interesting. I know we've discussed this on many occasions. I think, you know, and we're all now starting to think about post-COVID Lacuna Day, when we're all able to go back into our centre, okay, you know, face to face, in person. But I think these videos will probably have a role in what you do going forward, because uh, you know, I think the more examples that we have of practice, and there has been some fantastic practice across the FET sector, the more that we have those for people to engage with, they then open up other discussions, and they're ultimately, these things are, they're brilliant professional development tools. But I'm just conscious of time, and I'm just going to throw it open. I don't know who's going to answer this first, but you know, I think, as I said, you have done an amazing amount of work over the last 15 months, and you're not finished yet, as the man says. But looking forward, and you know, on the Teach Nimble, we have a slide where we have BC before COVID, DC during COVID, and AC after COVID. Somebody said to me recently, you got the AC/DC in there, Michael. But after COVID, where are you going next, and what are your thoughts on this whole area now as you look back over the last while and look to the future?
Okay, I'll jump in here. Mary, you might want to say something at the end, because I'm sure I might leave something out. But I suppose, first of all, look, we've learned a hell of a lot. That's the first thing to say about the last 15 months. I mean, we might have been tearing our hair out learning a lot of it, and stressed about the amount of work we had, but it was a huge learning process for us all. And I think, you know, we've all had to embrace the use of technology to support us in carrying out our roles, whether we are working for FESS, whether we're out there in the broader FET staff cohort of people. We've had to do it. I believe that much of the learning gained during the pandemic in embracing that use of technology, whether it be by us in FESS or the FET staff, I think will continue to be of value into the future. I think we'll be able to take a lot of it with us, whether we're back in that face-to-face or in a real planned blended learning environment, because I would imagine there will be a number of different centres now looking to work, whether it's within the ETB or whatever provider. They will be looking to see, are we going to plan blended learning now under the QQI guidelines here, under our own policy and our structures and procedures? Are we going to do that? But I think all of the different methodologies, the tools, all of those will be of value and will contribute to how we're going to do that. I suppose in FESS, we're already thinking about what our support is going to look like into the future. We are all aware that there's a strong desire to get back to seeing each other again. And I mean, actually seeing each other again, face to face, real life, not on Zoom. And we look forward to being able to offer true face-to-face experience as part of our future plans. However, we are already thinking of how the way in which we've engaged with people face-to-face might change a bit. We're looking maybe at creating materials that participants could engage with in their own time prior to coming to face-to-face sessions. The flipped classroom model, you know, the asynchronous model that we used ourselves in the Reimagining courses, give them material to come, to read, to learn, and then come to the sessions, and then we can use the sessions maybe for more lively debate or collaboration, or maybe producing a product, who knows. And we would also envisage the continued use of the clinic model, because I think in some ways, the standalone one-day events that we had maybe in Athlone or Portlaoise or wherever it was around the country, they were really useful. But sometimes what was missing is people went back and then they'd nowhere to go if they wanted to come back and share what they did, or question or query and find out what worked well for others. So we're kind of looking at ways in which we might supplement what we do with that clinic model, because as Mary said, we were new to it this year, but actually, you know, we've really embraced it, and I think the sector has embraced it. So I would see how we do our work actually might change a bit as well. Do you know what I'm saying? That's
Yeah,
what
yeah, no.
I think actually we all need to be open to reimagining and recreating what we do anyway, to keep it good, I suppose, and meaningful. And we need to capture what we've learned and bring it with us into the future, I think. So I don't know, Mary, if I've left anything out there.
No, I think you pretty much covered everything, but we've had discussions in the clinics about some of the digital tools and how they can be used in the face-to-face classroom. So
Yes.
I think people were kind of surprised at that. It was almost like in our heads, it was either one or the other. But, you know, I think that there'll be a lot of learning that has come out of this that can certainly be brought into the future with us.
Yeah, Mary, and I think that's an important point to finish on. I mean, I know in some of the work I've been doing myself of late, we've been looking at this with other ETBs around low impact blend, medium impact blend, and high impact blend. And that low impact blend could be just using a Kahoot in a face-to-face center setting. And again, a lot of this, as you've said, it provided people with an opportunity to really use technology. They may have not had a reason to use it before March 2020, but now they've used it. And you know what? The feedback, and I've seen it from a number of ETBs and other organizations that are working in the FET sector, is that, you know, this works. And particularly on the assessment side, Finola, that you talked about there, colleague once said to me, digital tools can actually make the invisible visible. What's in your head, how did people understand something. So I think, you talked about there about the best of both worlds, and I think that's where we all should be now. Looking forward, I can't wait myself to get back into a room with people and we have a chat and a cup of coffee and all those good things. But I think your point is well made, that sometimes the one-off, some people call them the drive-by workshop, you leave with it on the drive home in the car, you've actually more questions after the event that you probably got answered during it. So that's why these kind of blended FESS events going forward will actually be a huge benefit. And it also, I think the clinics will allow you to draw in the network of experts that you have out there, from Kerry all the way to Donegal and all the way over to Wexford and Waterford, so that you've all that network and that you can do that online, and you'll mix it up. And again, I'm sure that patchwork quilt that we've talked about will continue to add new patches as we go.
Yes,
So
yes.
I leave it to you to have the last word.
Yeah, just to say maybe that a lot of the information, and everything we've talked about today is on our website. So it's www.fess.ie for those who don't know it. So just keep an eye on that. But I think today maybe it's important to maybe end the session by providing you all with a flavour of some of the feedback from the participants who availed of that lovely suite of supports and resources that we've just spoken about during this session.
Thanks a million, Finola, and thank you, Mary. It's been a real pleasure, as always, to chat to you both, and continued success in the further education support service in the year ahead. Thank you both.